Hi everyone, Dawntrail is out and I am back. Sort of. For those who don't know, my name is Quintina and I'm a controller guide for Final Fantasy XIV, as well as some other things every once in a while too. As I have 2 young children, it's been difficult to find time to play or to record. Because of this, I may not be able to do all the job this expansion. I will cover Pictomancer and Viper, obviously, and I will see what else I can cover as I go. Of course, if you think any others really need an updated video, please let me know in the comments. Anyway, let's get started. As with all my past videos, there will be a macro setup available in the description for you to copy and paste, though that's probably more for those of you playing on PC. If you're on console and new to Final Fantasy XIV, don't worry, I will go over how you can add them manually. My style of play uses the double cross hotbar fairly heavily. This is accessed by double tapping your cross hotbar modifier. I used to play rhythm and fighting games when I was younger, so this feels natural to me. Some people like it too, so that's why I share it. If you're new to controller play for Final Fantasy XIV, it may take a few days to build up the muscle memory. If you play a lot and still do not like it after a week, then maybe my style is not for you, and that's fine. You will find your own style or see if another person has one closer to yours. Even so, you can still get ideas from my setup, so I hope you will find some use either way. By default, the cross hotbar modifier are your triggers, though if you go to System Configuration, you can edit that to be your bumpers. Some people might prefer that for better double tapping response. For AoEs, which are attacks meant to target large packs of enemies, I typically put those on the expanded. This is accessed by pressing left and right modifier together. For targeting, I prefer to use what I call bumper targeting. You use your bumpers while the cross hotbars are active. You can configure this to be a conal from your screen. The game does not teach you most targeting options, but I do have a fairly in-depth video that goes over most of them. The only things missing are features added since then, and those are the auto target, which I would recommend to use the option for close range. It's really useful in Fates and also when a boss comes back from being untargetable, as you can just spam your attack button. And the other option not in the original targeting guide is the ability to make your D-pad targeting always be what is called in the community a hard target. You don't really need this for Pictomancer, and I do not recommend this, as it takes away the ability to have temporary targets, which we call soft targets. I do explain soft versus hard targeting in the targeting video, and it is unbelievably helpful for healers, especially Astrologian. I will link this targeting video in the description and at the end of this video. The expanded and double cross hotbar are not on by default. To enable them, you will need to go into character configuration, hotbar settings, and there are settings in both cross and custom. To use the double cross hotbar, you will need to be on hold, which means you hold down your modifiers to use abilities. I also like for my double cross hotbar to be visible at all times to see cooldowns, so do enable always display double cross hotbar. And I have it set so I can place them separately. I will show why later when I cover the job gauges. If you have trouble double tapping consistently, do try different double cross hotbar input timers. In the custom section, we need to set up a hotbar to use. The double cross hotbar and expanded aren't their own special hotbar, rather they're just another way to access existing cross hotbars. To change cross hotbar normally, you can either hold your hotbar button, which is the right bumper by default, and then press the button for one of the 8 hotbars available to you. This is kind of slow and not ideal in battle. You can also quickly tap the bumper to cycle through the hotbars, but that's if they're not empty already. Anyway, there are 8 hotbars and I use hotbar 1 for my bottom hotbar, which I call the primary. Hotbar 2 is for my expanded, and for the double cross hotbar I use hotbar 3. If you're using my setup macros, you will need this to be the same. Otherwise, you will have to edit the macros to be the correct number for your setup. Make sure that whatever hotbars you use are not set to shared. You can check that in the sharing tab under cross hotbar. I only have bar 8 set to shared because that is where my macro menu resides. It is possible to configure which bars are cycled through when you quickly use the hotbar switch button, which is normally the right bumper. If you're using default settings, it will cycle through all of them as long as they're not empty. Personally, I do not want to be too messed up if I accidentally press it, so I wanted to stay on my hotbar 1. To configure this, you need to be in custom in set selection. However, this is entirely optional and you are not required to change this to follow my setup. I do have hotbar 4 enabled as well, so I can put things like Palace of the Dead potions or Bosnia items. I typically just leave hotbar 4 empty for jobs where I do not do those things, or I temporarily enable or disable this hotbar as needed. Notice I also have hotbar 8 allowed when I'm out of combat. This is where I have a macro menu. You can see that on hotbar 8 I press a macro and it changes. This will not be covered in this video. I do have another video where I go over this, and I will link it now and in the description. Alright, with most of the setup explanations out of the way, here are my hotbars. I favor the primary right side, and that's where you will find the basic combo starting with Fire and Red and the best movement spells like Holy and White and Hammer Skill. The D-pad is used for weaving abilities in between spells. On the left side we have the motifs. You will use those before combat when they're instant, and also during combat, but they won't be instant anymore. On the double cross hotbar, we have some of our big cooldowns, roll actions, and limit break. You will notice Rainbow Drip and Star Prism are repeated between the left and right side. Since I favor the right, it's easier to look for the light up icons there. However, they're on the D-pad, as some of the other actions like Lucid and Addle have set spots that I use for other jobs, so I don't want to stray from those other setups. I prefer for spells and weapon skills, anything that activates the global cooldown, to ideally, if possible, be on an action button and not on the D-pad, to make them easier to use while dodging. Because of this, I repeated them on the left side so they can be on action buttons. Of course, you might be wondering, right about now, how to actually place the actions into the hotbar if you're a new player. First, open up the Actions menu and go to the Actions section. Keep in mind that roll actions are in the Rule section, while Limit Break and Sprint are in the General section. If you have a mouse, and this is possible if you're on PC, PlayStation, or Xbox, you can drag a skill onto your cross hotbar and even the double cross hotbar. If you don't have a mouse, then hit the sub command button. That's square for PlayStation users and X for Xbox users, assuming you're using the default settings in system configuration. Now you can place the action by pressing the combination you want to place it on. However, you can only do that on the primary. If you want to place on the double cross hotbar, you will need to manually switch to the primary to it. Since I hold my double cross hotbar on bar 3, let me manually switch into it. Remember, hold the right bumper and the applicable button. If you're not using default settings and your right bumper does something else, check which button you have set up for hotbar switching. I like to use the expanded for my AoE rotation. Of course, not all AoE buttons might fit there, but the others will be on the double cross hotbar. I do keep the D-pad with similar actions as the primary since they're used for both single and AoE rotations. However, if you need to renew a motif in the middle of an AoE rotation, you will need to go back to the primary. For placing the actions, you cannot drag and drop into the expanded directly even if you have a mouse hooked up. You will need to manually switch your primary bar to the bar that holds your expanded. Then apply the skills to it. You might notice I repeat them on the left and right because I don't like to worry about using the correct order. It is possible to go into character configuration and set up the expanded to use the same segment, so you don't have to repeat, and left plus right is always the same as right plus left. However, I don't do that because I do have separate versions of my expanded for my crafters and gatherers. But for battle jobs, I repeat. I don't want mistakes in the middle of combat. You might also notice I do not have sprint on my cross hotbars. This is because it's hard to find a good spot that fits all jobs without taking away from better job-specific skill. I also don't want different jobs to have sprint in different locations. So I put sprint in my right analog stick's click in button. To use sprint this way, we have to go to system configuration and enable it to use either macro 98 or 99. Once you pick one, you need to place a sprint macro there. If you have any trouble seeing the macro on the screen, I do have it in the description as well. However, you might still want to see the sprint cooldown, and that's where I would recommend putting it on a regular keyboard hotbar that is shared. At this point, I'm required by the YouTube algorithm to remind you to like, subscribe, or leave a comment, though you're of course free to ignore this message while I go over how to set up the sprint cooldown down right here. To add to a keyboard hotbar first, you need to enable one in character config. I recommend using a shared one so you can use the same for all. You also want to set it so you can hide unused spaces. Next, you need a mouse. If you don't have one, you can use touch controls if you're on a controller and a console that supports it. If not, you can enable virtual mouse by holding left bumper and pressing right click in. If you have any issues with that, check in system configuration that it is enabled. If you're on a console, system configuration will look a little different, but the option should still be there. I'm using the PC version, and they do vary between the various versions. Then you can use mouse controls to drag and drop onto the hotbar. Next up, we have the gauges. Mine are in the middle. The canvases have your motifs, and the palette shows your gauge with your white and black paints. If yours looks different, that's because I'm using simple mode. It is completely optional to make them like mine. Feel free to put them wherever you like. Either way, to do so, you'll want to go into your HUD layout, then canvases, and palette. Click on the gear icon if you want to use simple mode. While we're in here, if you're placing your double cross hotbar separately via the setting in user configuration, you will have with a left W cross hotbar and a right W cross hotbar. W stands for double because W and double using Japanese pronunciation sound the same. I like to place my gauges in the middle of my double cross hotbar, and so placing them separately means I can make sure they are far enough apart to do exactly that. You can use your camera analog stick to move them, or you can use a mouse to drag them. If you're new to Final Fantasy XIV, it is possible to use abilities that are not on the global cooldown in between other abilities that are, as long as they provide time for it. Pictomancer's casts are all shorter than their recasts, which means they provide time to use at least one ability. Pictomancer also has instant spells on the global cooldown like white, black, and hammer spells, which allow the usage of 2 of the global cooldown abilities in between. Abilities that do not trigger a recast timer on spells are typically called OGCD, which means off the global cooldown. In both cases, you can cue the OGCD as soon as you can start the spell. This is very useful when casting, as you can queue up as soon as you start the cast. Let me show you in slow motion. Please note macroed abilities cannot do this, which is why it is not recommended to make macros of actions. Sprint is fine because it does not support queuing anyway. Only job and rule actions do. Sprint is a general action. Before I sign off, I just want to talk about how much I enjoyed Pictomancer. It was a joy to level, and it just feels very fluid. However, I do wish that white and black were not separate buttons, especially since black blocks you from using white anyway. It is cumbersome, and I would rather it replaces it. I'm okay with the palette combo being a separate button, just to make it clear that palette is active without having to look at the buff, but that's because it's a multi-part combo, whereas black is only one and you can easily see it on your gauge, so I would prefer if it automatically replaced white instead of being its own separate action. Let me know your thoughts on Pictomancer and this setup, and also if you have any questions on controller play. Anyway, until next time.